cut is about 70 or 80 Liberal MPs. And secondly, 9 out of 10 young Canadians believe they'll never own a home under this government. It's embarrassing, Mr. Speaker. Canadians used to be able to pay off a home in 25 years. Now it takes 25 years to save to even afford a down payment. Right. This Prime Minister refuses to listen to our premiers. If he's so proud of his carbon tax, will the Mayor of the county come out of his house and actually meet with premiers?
I'd like to remind all members and as the Speaker has made this point before, it's important not to call into question any member's courage. The Honourable Minister for Seniors, Labour and Seniors.
I think, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, it is very important to list the constituents. I'd like to quote Danielle from Foothills. She said, "I do my family's taxes, so I know we got $850. We get an extra little bump for me and my husband because we live in a rural environment. And when I go back and I look at what I spent last year in carbon taxes because I was working from home, I wasn't commuting, my gas bills were way down, and even the amount of tax that I paid on my home heating bills were principally natural gas for where I live. I would say that I probably ended up better off with that transfer." We should listen to constituents like Danielle of Foothills, Alberta. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister has spent the last 2 weeks reminding Canadians of the disasters he has caused over the last 8 years: passports, immigration, late job insurance payments, inflation, interest rates, and of course the doubling of rent costs. And the list is very long. And yesterday his Liberal members voted against the Conservative motion that was adopted by this House to have a meeting with all premiers. The last meeting was in 2016. Will he or will he not call this meeting? Or does he prefer to continue destroying everything through interference without consulting the provinces? What is he scared of? The Honourable Minister for Innovation. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, and we act. On the other hand, Canadians hear that there is absolutely no action. And no action or inaction is not a strategy. Inaction is not a plan. Inaction is not an option, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan for Canadians. We will invest in a greater number of housing units. We will invest in childcare, Mr. Speaker. We will invest in jobs. We will invest in growth. Mr. Speaker, we'll let them create their slogans while we will continue to actually work for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 8 years of this government, let us talk about its record, Mr. Speaker. Housing costs have doubled. Immigration waiting times are never-ending. Over 800,000 Quebecers are using food banks every single month. Our streets are less and less safe. Violent crime is on the up. And bad news, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister now wants to impose his incompetence on the provinces. It's like giving the key to our house to the very vandals who have just ransacked it. Will the Prime Minister finally admit that he has absolutely no skill in managing his own government and that he should, for once, mind his own business?
Yeah, keep your hands in your own pockets.
Minister for the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, we could talk about vandals, but let us talk about climate vandals who are just on the other side of the House, Mr. Speaker.
Stephen,
the member on the other side wants to know what the benefit of carbon pricing is. It's not difficult. All he has to do is look and speak to the member right behind him, who was part of the very first government in North America to price carbon, because it's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker. It's the right thing to do for the economy. It's the right thing to do in fighting climate change. It's the right thing to do for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean.
I should not be an MP.
The Minister for Immigration, Christine Fréchette, reiterated the Quebec government's minimum demands. Nothing spectacular, no exaggerations. She's not asking for full powers in immigration, just a bare minimum. Fair distribution of asylum seekers between the provinces, reimbursement of reception costs, and adequate funding for francisation. I don't think that's not too much to ask. Will the government respond positively to Quebec's demands, or will we end up with yet another Liberal squabble? Because they seem to love that. The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Mr. Speaker, what I've agreed with Minister Fréchette when I met her 2 weeks ago would be that we would use our full powers in our respective fields of jurisdiction under the Canada-Quebec agreement in a reasonable and reasoned way. That is what I expect to do with her over the next few months. Canadians and Quebecers will benefit from this. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the discussions are going so well that the Quebec government is thinking of holding a referendum on immigration. The truth is that Quebec is so fed up of being laughed in the face by this government that it is thinking of turning to the people. And given the federal government's incompetence in managing its responsibilities, we all know that things would go a lot better if Quebec had full powers. Will the minister respond to Minister Fréchette's very reasonable requests, or would he prefer to wait for the entire population of Quebec to express its views on this federal government's incompetence when it comes to immigration? The Honourable Minister for Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. And Mr. Speaker, there's not a country in the world that would give full powers to someone else. What I have agreed upon with Minister Fréchette is that we would follow our respective responsibilities in our respective fields of jurisdiction to best serve Quebecers, and that's I will do, and that's what the Minister will do as well. The Honourable Member for Drummond. The French Prime Minister is visiting Canada and Quebec. We all know the special ties that Quebec has with this great country, the cradle of human rights and secularism. At a time when monarchists are proudly singing God Save the King, when the tragic history of Acadians is being trampled underfoot, I believe there is an opportunity to remind France that we still share some democratic values. Will the government undertake not to contribute in any way, either directly or indirectly, to the challenge to Bill 21 on the secular nature of the Quebec state? The Honourable Minister for Justice. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I have already mentioned a number of times, as has already been mentioned by the Prime Minister himself, with the current situation with Bill 21, when this situation reaches the Supreme Court, were it to arrive to the Supreme Court, we'll be here to intervene to defend the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and to defend rights like the right to free speech, the right to equality, and religious rights. Thank you.
The Honourable Member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Speaker, after 8 years of this NDP Liberal government, this Prime Minister is not worth the cost. But don't take my word for it. Heather from Newbury writes, people need the cost of living brought under control now. And Carol from Strathroy says, one more tax will take us down. We're already struggling. To the average Canadian, the cost of the carbon tax on gas, groceries, home heating, farmers and families is punishing, not progress. So will the Prime Minister axe the tax on farmers and help make food cheaper by passing Bill C-234 in its original form?
The Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors.
All right, I thank the Honourable Member for that question, and I would allow Danielle from Foothills to continue with her comments. She also added, I would say that I probably ended up better off with that transfer. She also said, and so I think a lot of people would be of that view, that if you are going to implement some kind of revenue-neutral carbon pricing, that's probably not a bad way of doing it. Now, these are the words of Danielle from Foothills. I'm happy to inform Danielle that 2.5 years later, since she made that comment, it is now up to $1,800 for a family of 4 in Alberta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Lambton, Kent, Middlesex.
Well, Mr. Speaker, even the NDP Liberal Environment Chair admitted that the carbon tax has no impact on climate change.